Hello everyone. Sorry, let me just adjust this a little bit. Today we will be reviewing the series Norsemen, because I just looked it up before I watched this and seen that it has unfortunately been canceled by Netflix after the third season, so there won't be any more to the show, although I'm kind of bummed out about that. They did at least end it in a what's the word I'm looking for? They did at least end the story, rounding it out to basically. It kind of went like. I guess you could say it was almost like a weird episodic thing. How do I word this correctly? They went back and kind of did the prequel after the sequel in a way to the show, because they kind of tell the backstory, I guess, is what I'm really trying to get around to. Anyhow, I am going to pull up the names of these people in this show, because it is about Vikings, although it is a comedy. But at the same time, these names are absolutely impossible to pronounce, so at least some of them were, and sometimes it was hard to understand what they were saying in certain parts. But I highly recommend you go watch the show and maybe put on subtitles. I probably should have done that myself, but by the time I even got around to the guy that I really couldn't understand, it was already a little too late. So anyhow, this. See, I'm glad I pulled this up. So this follows a few characters actually. We have, I would say, our main characters are Orm, Arvid, Hjalvarg, Freya, Rufus, Kark, and that's pretty much it as far as main characters go. So anyhow, in the very beginning, Rufus has been captured by this Viking tribe, and then he becomes a slave alongside of Kark. And obviously he used to be a man of high power, where he lived to the west in Rome. So I'm just going to leave these pulled up so that I don't forget anybody's name here. So, while Orm's brother and Arvid and Freya are out raiding, he is the acting chieftain, while his brother is gone. Excuse me. What? Okay. Sorry about that. So he is the acting chieftain while his brother is gone. When his brother comes back, now I can't remember exactly the way that his brother ends up being. Oh, yes. There's this thing called the. It's this rite of passage to death for all the elder Vikings to basically jump off the cliff and go meet Odin in Valhalla. I wish I could remember. Was it the Upastab? Yeah, so some of these things are hard to remember just based on the pronunciation of them. So I'm sorry if I Ufastad. Oh, that doesn't sound right. Awful step. Oh, it's so hard to remember everything in the show. Anyway, if you go watch it, you'll probably remember it better than I do, because I tried to binge watch a show as quickly as I could, because I like to do that with shows that are short. But some things I might not be able to pronounce or remember quite correctly. That the name of it anyway. I remember what it was enough that I can explain it, but I can't pronounce it or remember the name of it. But anyhow, it's basically this jump to their death. That's what it is. Anyhow, only one of them does it, and the rest of them decide that it's not a good idea. That's not how they want to go out. So they run away from Kark, who was the one who took them there, and they go back, and they basically just live in the forest till I guess they die, or they find a new, different, or more honorable way out to Valhalla and to meet Odin. Anyhow, as the show goes on, the jokes get a little racier, I must say, that's for sure. But it is quite comical. It does have its darker and more serious side, especially when, Yalvarg enters the story, because he's a much darker character. And I'm glad that they did go back and do his backstory so that you kind of knew why he became the person he was in the present. Although it was for quite a ridiculous reason, because he was just losing his hair and his friend made a comment on it, and then he decides that he's going to take on his friend's army and kill his former best friend. And so the whole point of Yalvarg's conquest is to get this map that he was promised. So after Orm's brother is killed, actually killed by Orm because he wants to become chieftain, after he was stabbed by... I can't remember who it was he was stabbed by. It was somebody that he'd done something wrong to. I can't remember that exact part of the story. But anyhow, it was Orm that ended up killing him in the very end, to obviously become the chieftain himself, because that's what he wanted out of... that's what he wanted to be, was the full-time chieftain. So he eventually gets his wish, but obviously the town kind of goes downhill with him in charge, so eventually Arvid becomes the chieftain after... What was it that Orm did that got him outlawed? Anyhow, he does become a criminal, and so he... Oh yes, because their village was raided, and then I believe he was... How did that go? Their village was raided, he became a slave. Oh yes, that's right. He becomes a slave and then he escapes. Or was it he escaped and then became a slave? I'm trying to remember what he did the first time around as to why he was trying to escape. Oh, right. I believe it's because he sold the rest of his people out to Yalvarg. I believe that's correct. And so then, eventually when Arvid becomes chieftain, he captures him and Rufus, and then they are able to escape with Arvid's wife at the time, who was... What was her name? Anyhow, yeah, they are able to escape with his wife at the time. And then they are obviously outlaws, and this one guy, Bone Crusher, who was protecting Rufus when Orm led his first raid, which was more successful for everybody else but him, because he ends up almost drowning himself by jumping off the boat with all his armor on. So, yeah. They escape. Anyway, this guy named Bone Crusher that was protecting Rufus during that time ends up finding them in the forest. Orm tells them that they are outlaws. Obviously, that wasn't a good decision, because then Bone Crusher takes them back to the city, where then he becomes a slave. Eventually, he does... I believe he does earn his... he does earn his credibility back as chieftain after Yalvarg tricks Arvid, right, into breaking the peace at the Thing Speak, or whatever it was there. They were trying to make some sort of deal for the map, and it ends up they were on Arvid's side, but then the guy who stabbed the original chieftain comes up and starts talking to Arvid, and then Arvid loses his cool, and then he becomes an outlaw. So the story just kind of goes from there, and then Arvid is able to escape, and he comes back to see Freya, but by that time, and then eventually Freya fights Hjalvarg one-on-one once he gets his new hands, because that was one of the things that happened earlier on in the show, was that Freya chopped off both his hands when he was about to kill Arvid from behind before. So then this time, Freya turns around, and his new hands have these it was almost like Assassin's Creed type blades come out of them, and then he says, "Never turn your back on your enemy," and stabs her, I'm assuming in both lungs, which would be obviously an instant death. Maybe not quite instant, because she does sort of like stand there and breathe heavily for a few minutes, but yeah, you would lose all the air eventually in your body, and she passes away. So then Arvid and his crew leave Rufus and Orm behind, because obviously they betrayed them. So now Rufus was getting this ship together to sail back to Rome, so west, but they take it on him and sail west themselves. And I believe that was where the present story ended, and then they go back and talk about the what happened to Hjalvarg to make him the way he is now. And it was basically his friend telling him that he had thinning hair, so that he goes nuts and burns down their whole, I guess, hut or whatever they were in partying that night. I wouldn't really call it a hut. It was more like the building they were in. And then that's how he gets his one weird eye, because one of his eyes is yellow. So I'm assuming, I'm not sure exactly how he got it. They didn't really show it. I'm assuming maybe just because he went nuts, it had something to do with maybe the power he gained. I'm not really sure what happened there, but anyhow, he's almost like half human, half snake, I guess is kind of like the concept, maybe, because he does do some really weird actions, although I guess he was a man of high power before, so his bowing is really weird. But anyhow, yeah, it was a good show all around. I think I've covered almost everything. Everything that I could think of anyway. I thought this was going to be a little bit longer, but yeah, I would definitely go and watch the show. It actually, if you've ever seen the show Vikings, I believe the guy that, the guy that played Hjalvarg's friend was actually one of the Saxtons, if I'm remembering that correctly, because it's been a while since I've seen Vikings, from the very first season of Vikings. And he does a good job no matter what show he's in. I know this show was kind of supposed to be half serious, half joking all the time. One more thing I wanted to touch on too was Rufus's story. It finally explains how they caught Rufus, because Orm was actually betrays Hjalvarg and lets his enemy go. While they were all in their partying, they ended up kicking him out because he was supposed to lead this battalion to flank the other troops, and he just leads them deeper into the forest. So when they find that out, they kick him out of the, I guess you could call it a mess hall, technically. But yeah, so he ends up letting that guy go. Hjalvarg puts him in prison, sentences him to death. But Orm's brother comes up with this plan after Orm tells him about this land to the west that his cellmate told him in there. So he says to Hjalvarg that he will make him a map, and if he spares his brother's life, if he spares Orm's life, Hjalvarg agrees to that. And as we know, if you've seen this show already, that it just ends up causing more problems, like Hjalvarg predicted, than it should have in the future after Orm and Arvid become chieftains of the town that they live in. But yes, Rufus actually was in England at the time when they found out about this land and first raided it. So obviously that's how they ended up capturing Rufus. and then we know what happens to him in the very first season of the show. So he does kind of gain his power back in a way, but then he ends up losing it again after they take the ship back to the west themselves and leave him in Norway to basically fend for himself with Orm, and I guess by this point it would be Arvid's ex-wife, because he was with Freya, and the first chieftain's wife actually lied about being impregnated by Arvid as well. So there's definitely people, the women seem to be fighting more for power than love, I guess. They all kind of want that top status, it seems. And I guess it makes sense back in those days that you would want to be higher up on the rank, because then you'd have more protection, I suppose. The lower you are, obviously, the less people care about you. At least that's how it went back then, anyhow. I guess status is still kind of a thing today, isn't it? But it's not quite as... you're not going to get killed over having a lower status than somebody else. You're not going to be... Yeah. That's how it went in the Viking ways, anyway. It's from what I've seen from shows, anyhow, and kind of history, I guess, seems to be status was a serious thing in the Viking times. Anyhow, I believe now that I've covered everything, so please like, share, and subscribe, and please go watch the show if you haven't seen it, and comment down below if you have seen it. And I guess that's it. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye for now.